A very warm welcome to all our friends, academic faculty, and industry captains from UC Berkeley, India, and elsewhere across the world to Speaker Series India at Berkeley's first event of 2021. My name is Shubham Parekh, and I'm the president of Speaker Series India at Berkeley for the year 2020-2021. Speaker Series India at Berkeley is a forum where we invite speakers from the political, social activism, and entrepreneurial spectrum of India. Our speakers engage with the Berkeley community on issues which have a direct impact on the lives of approximately 1.4 billion Indians. In the past, members associated to our organization have hosted eminent personalities like Rahul Gandhi, Omar Abdullah, Suresh Prabhu, noted journalist Barkhada, actor Baman Irani, founder of Urban Club Raghav Chandra, amongst many others. Carrying forward our mission, we have invited a leading voice on the entrepreneurial and policy reform space in India. As we enter a post-pandemic world, we at Speaker Series thought it will be a perfect opportunity for us to invite a leader from the healthcare industry, an industry which helped us manage this pandemic so well and will be the wealth creators in the coming decade as India develops further as a pharmacy of the world. Even though our speaker for today is someone almost everyone in the audience has read about, I would still like to give a short introduction to start off the event with. As we celebrate International Women's Day, it is our privilege to host Ms. Kiran Mazumdar, a pioneer and visionary of the biotechnology industry in India and the founder of Biocon. At the young age of 25, Ms. Shaw started Biocon from a garage, and since then it has grown to become India's largest biopharmaceutical company. Ms. Shaw has built a world-class research-driven corporation every Indian can take pride in. And rightly so, she has thus been the recipient of the prestigious Padma Shri and Padma Bhushan for a groundbreaking work in biotechnology. Consistently ranked as India's richest self-made woman, her unique philanthropy follows the approach of compassionate capitalism. Fulfilling a commitment to giving back to communities and leading by example has led her to shape a legacy focused on the creation of accessible and affordable healthcare in India. Her story is one of innovation, entrepreneurship, and equity. We are proud to have Ms. Shaw with us here today, who will be talking about her journey, the entrepreneurial biotech ecosystem in India today, and the next steps for India to grow these ecosystems with respect to policy making. I would now like to ask my co-moderator for the day, Anvita, to introduce herself and go over the Zoom etiquettes for the event and general instructions before Ms. Shaw's speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubham. Hello, everyone. I am Anvita Kulshresht, the founder of Speaker Series India at Berkeley. As a senior majoring in molecular biology and toxicology, wishing to pursue research in genetics, focusing on identifying potential therapeutic targets for drug development, I'm extremely honored to have Mrs. Shaw with us today to talk about the current biotechnology landscape in India. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you all of the flow of the event and some basic Zoom etiquettes. We will start with Mrs. Shaw's speech for the first 20-25 minutes, after which we will have a moderated Q&A session by Shubham and myself, and eventually we would open it up for audience questions in the last 15 minutes. We have received many questions through our sign-up sheet, but in case you have any burning questions during the session, please feel free to private message one of our members who has named themselves as Speaker Series India at Berkeley using the chat option. Please do not send any questions or comments in the comment chat. Lastly, we would just request you to keep your audio muted to avoid any sort of disruption. Without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Mrs. Shaw for her speech.
Thank you, Shubham. Thank you, Anvita. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be amongst all of you. I wish I was there in person, but anyway, this is the best we can do. Let me start by, talking about my journey. And the way I'd like to start is by saying, well, in 1978, India was a very different country. It was an under-resourced country, and I was trying to start a high-tech business, which nobody understood, by the way. I was, as you said, 25 years old. I actually started this business quite by accident because I actually trained to be a brewmaster, and I came back to India wanting to pursue a career in brewing, but I was told by the brewing industry that this is not a woman's job and you're not welcome. So really on a rebound, I decided, okay, what else can I do? And it was an accidental encounter with an Irish biotech entrepreneur that saw me start Biocon in 1978. Um, I think it was this kind of accidents in life that tell people what life has in store for you. And I, for one, always believe that, don't get disappointed if things don't work your way, because other things open up which you had never thought of. And I, for one, never thought I would ever start my own company. So I did start in a garage. I did start with a very, very modest capital of 10,000 rupees and an idea that was way ahead of its time. And that was about biotechnology. And it was about, developing enzyme technologies to replace polluting technologies. And as you know, in the late 70s and 80s, climate change and environmental sustainability was hardly fashionable or even understood. Now, I did basically have huge credibility challenges in building my business because I was 25 years old. I was a woman with no business experience and no money to my name. And if you remember, the India of the 70s and 80s belonged to, large business houses. And if you did have entrepreneurs, they were kind of retired from big companies trying to, mimic what they had learned in their own businesses. And these were kind of gray haired men who basically had a lot of experience and knew how to, run businesses. So here I was, this bit of a novice with no experience and trying to start a biotech company. So I was a huge risk in the eyes of bankers who thought I was unbankable. People thought I was not worth, it was not worth working for a woman employer because they felt I couldn't give them job security. And I just had a huge problem convincing people that biotech was an exciting business. So, I do think I was the first tech startup in India because it was a garage startup. And, proverbially, startups in the tech world always start in garages. So I'm quite proud of that. Now, of course, it wasn't easy at that time. And, I did sort of take it up as a challenge. And I said, look, I'm going to prove to those naysayers that I can do it and that biotech is a very exciting business. And although I couldn't find talent, in the first few months of my journey, I would say after some time when I started building this business with my bare hands, I suddenly started generating interest from engineers from IITs, would you believe it? They started looking at what I was doing and they said, hey, what are you doing? Tell us about it. And I was saying, I'm trying to develop enzyme technologies. And there were a couple of them who said, look, this is really cool because we are also trying to, work in this area. And that started a conversation with many of these young engineers. And my first, really qualified, sort of members of my team were from IIT. And they were the ones who were bold enough to join me in my journey. So it has been a very exciting and interesting journey because I had many challenges. How do I attract talent? I mean, here I was trying to develop a high-tech business, and my first two employees were retired tractor mechanics. I needed to do better, right? So I did manage to attract, really good, engineers from IIT who stayed with me for a long time. And in fact, the one person who's really stayed with me even today is my CEO, who was actually an engineer from IIT Powai and then went on to do his PhD at MIT. And he decided to join me a few years later. So I think it's been a very exciting journey. I, of course, formed a team of people with and that was very important for me as an entrepreneur, that I needed people who believed in this excitement, who believed in this technology, and who wanted to make a change and a difference. I think that's very important. The power of purpose is extremely important for any entrepreneurial journey or for any entrepreneur for that matter. And everyone has to believe in that purpose. So you're almost in mission mode to succeed. And so what we did was, in the first 20 years of that journey, I managed to attract a lot of energetic, young, talented scientists and engineers, and we started on this whole path of developing novel enzyme technologies that could actually make a big difference to the way industrial processes were conducted. And we felt very good about it because we did develop very innovative technologies. And, as an entrepreneur, when I started Biocon, I was, led by a couple of driving missions. One was I wanted a research-led organization. The second one was that I wanted to make it a great place for scientists and engineers to work. And of course, the most important other mission I had was I wanted it to be an exciting place for women to pursue careers. So those were the kind of missions I had, and driving missions I had when I was developing Biocon. And if I look back on it, I think most of it has been realized because Biocon is indeed a very research-led organization today. Uh, I've attracted some of the best talent in the scientific and engineering world. And I would say I am proud of the fact that, well, we have 30% of our employees as women, though I would have liked more. And where I don't think I'm very happy is the fact that I've still only managed to attract a large number of women in my research and development department. I don't think I've attracted enough women or developed enough women in other departments, especially manufacturing, especially marketing, those kind of areas. I still don't have enough women. And that's where I'm really trying to focus my efforts. So what happened was that, 10 years into my entrepreneurial journey with this small Irish biotech company, Unilever acquired the Irish company. And Unilever then basically threw me into the deep end by saying, now, guys, you can't be a sort of an entrepreneurial amateur company. You got to learn to be professional. And actually, that helped me a lot because it professionalized us in a very short time. I had to suddenly conform to a big multinationals requirements of standards and benchmarks. And so we quickly pivoted to learn all these, global standards and best practices, which I think was a very pivotal time in our and defining moment in our journey because we really learned to professionalize very fast. And what was a real eureka moment for us was that Unilever actually then finally told me that the most valuable part of what they had acquired from the Irish company was the technology I had developed in India, the enzyme technology that I had developed in India. And then they made me realize that it was a very nice, value, creation that we had done. And they helped me with understanding what IP is and how to create IP and how to value IP. So that was a very important part of my journey. And then, Unilever decided 10 years later that they wanted to exit this kind of biotech space, and they wanted to focus on their consumer products business. So at that time, I decided that I wanted to get back this business and, didn't want to be part of a big multinational company. So, me and my husband actually, borrowed money and managed to kind of buy back, Unilever's shareholding in my company. And then we became a very independent company. And that was also an inflection point when I wanted to basically reinvent my business from enzymes to biopharmaceuticals. Because I realized that a lot of the technologies that we had developed were very, very applicable to, protein therapeutics, because after all, enzymes are proteins. And I said I should be agnostic to the end product. I think we should look at what else can we do. And at that time, I really decided that it was great to really focus on biopharmaceuticals because there was a big need in India. India was the epicenter of diabetes, and we were importing all our insulins, and most people couldn't afford recombinant human insulin, so they were using animal insulin. I realized, and a very dear friend of mine who had breast cancer needed antibody treatment, and believe me, it was so expensive that she almost had to give up her life savings to get herself treated. And so I just felt, look, this is crazy. I've got to do something to make it more affordable. And I think that either it is okay.
Sorry, we're just muting the participant and removing them from the meeting. Really sorry for that.
Yeah. So anyway, it doesn't matter. Either it was somebody, hacking into our conference. But anyway, so what happened was that I decided that I've got to do something, and my whole philosophy, my business philosophy, has been about affordable innovation and affordable access, because I feel that's a very interesting business model. And I'll touch upon that when I talk about today, because that's what the world needs today. As you can see, COVID has taught us that. Okay. And so I have always then focused my business on developing products that provide affordable access to life-saving medicines. And I think, the fact that we are one of the largest producers of insulins in the world today, and we are one of the largest producers of biosimilar drugs today, gives us that opportunity to provide affordable access to these kind of life-saving medicines. Of course, we've also focused on very novel therapeutics as well, because I felt that India must definitely move from the volume to the value game. Because I think if you look at it, we cater to 60% of vaccines in the world. We cater to almost 30% of generic medicines in the world. And yet we only account for 3% of the market share by value. So basically, we have to move away from this commoditized, low value, sort of pharmacy of the world label that we have, to a high value, pharmacy of the world label, because we do need to innovate and create more value out of IP driven innovation rather than Me Too innovation. And so there as well, I think Biocon embarked on a very bold sort of innovation-led, novel, never before, sort of discovered sort of medicines, and that kind of a journey. And I'm quite proud of the fact that we've actually developed quite a few interesting products. And these are all first-in-class products. So I think I'm very proud of that. One of the drugs that two of the drugs I actually licensed from a Cuban research institute in Havana. I had gone to visit Havana many years ago when I was trying to get into biopharmaceuticals, knowing that, if I want to look for novel molecules, where am I going to find them at an affordable price point? Because I knew that many of the US universities would definitely be good, sources. But whether I could afford it at that stage was the big question. So I felt, okay, let me look for, cheaper sources of good innovation. And I went to Havana. I got two very interesting molecules. One was a humanized anti-EGFR to treat head and neck cancer. And this actually was an important drug for India, because India has a huge incidence of head and neck cancers because of tobacco chewing. And I thought, hey, this is a drug that actually can help. And so I brought that back for development in India. And then I also in-licensed an anti-CD6 first-in-class antibody, which is like a checkpoint in autoimmune disease. And that drug actually has proved to be very, very interesting, because not only did, of course, one thing I did find out was that it's very tough to develop novel drugs in India, because India doesn't have the scientific and novel molecule kind of ecosystem, largely because we lack the clinical temper with which to actually develop these and take these to the market. So although I did develop these drugs in India, and I am marketing these drugs in India, I just felt I was not doing justice to my novel therapeutics. So I did license the anti-CD6 to a US company in San Diego, and they are developing it for graft versus host disease, lupus nephritis, and many other autoimmune indications which are unmet in terms of needs. And I actually found that this drug, helped us in COVID quite a lot because it actually attacked certain inflammatory pathways that were causing this huge mortality in COVID patients who had an hyperimmune response to COVID-19. And so in India, this drug we got, it was a repurposed drug for in India, and because in India it's being used for psoriasis, but we repurposed it for COVID-19 treatment. We got, emergency use authorization, and I'm really happy that we've saved almost thousands of lives. I mean, at the last count, I think we had treated and about 4,000 patients successfully. So I think that was a big realization that these kind of drugs are very, very important. um, I just wanted to give you a flavor of all the things we've been doing. I have believed very much in economies of scale because of India. And that is what I think will deliver affordable access to the kind of drugs we are making. This is very counterintuitive to what Western biotech companies and Western pharmaceutical companies think about. They actually focus on low volume, high value kind of a business model. And I do just the opposite. I think of high volume, low value. And in today's day and age, I can tell you that our model is working much better than what the Western models are trying to do. Because you can see in the case of COVID vaccines, it's the Indian vaccine makers who are coming to the rescue of the world. I mean, this low volume, high value kind of approach that even the vaccine makers in the West have taken doesn't help anybody. They've been focusing on small Western affluent populations for with their very high cost vaccines. And today, when they need high volume, they're not able to pivot. And you can see that when they try to produce it at scale, they're failing because they are not able to get batch after batch of consistency. This is very scary. I don't know whether you read, but in the recent past, many batches have been pulled out of the market because there's been batch to batch variation. Indian companies, on the other hand, are so used to producing things at scale that I think we've done it quite seamlessly, producing the huge numbers of vaccine doses at scale. So I think the model that we are following in India is quite interesting. It is about economies of scale. And I've always said, for me, a blockbuster drug is not about $1 billion. It's about serving 1 billion patients. If you're serving 1 billion patients around the world, it is a blockbuster. Just realizing $1 billion and charging and creating that $1 billion by charging a bomb doesn't really make it such a great blockbuster. That's the way I feel about the healthcare business. This is my journey, how we pivoted, from enzymes to biopharmaceuticals. I, of course, divested my by enzyme business in 2007, and I did very well out of that because I sold it to my biggest competitor, which was Novozymes, a Danish company who were very happy to buy it. I created quite a lot of value out of that sale and invested it in growing my biopharmaceuticals business. Today, I think we are on a path of creating a very large biopharmaceutical company out of India. We are one of the largest biosimilar companies in the world. We are the largest, I would say, a pure play, fully integrated biosimilar company in the world for sure. We are the third largest insulin producers in the world by volume. I would like to now catch up on the value game as well. We have got 5 of our biosimilars already approved in US and Europe, which I think is quite a feat for a company out of India. We have a great team. So, I started as a one-woman band, and today, of course, we are over 15,000 in terms of an employee strength. And so let me now kind of pivot to the India of today. As you know, when I started Biocon, there was no question of venture capital. I did everything through debt financing. And in those days, remember, it was high interest debt. We used to talk about 16 and 18% interest rates. And, that's how I built Biocon over the years. uh, the first introduction to venture capital came for me uh, 10 years into my journey when I was trying to scale up one of our homegrown technologies, which actually at that time India was very uncomfortable about trying to scale up a homegrown technology. They kept telling me, why don't you license a technology from outside like most companies do? Aren't you taking such a big risk by trying to see whether your technology works or not? And I said, well, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, biotechnology is a technology driven business. I cannot be licensing those technologies. I have to create my own technologies. So I was finding it very difficult to raise capital, even debt for that matter, because they thought this is too high a risk to, even give me a loan for. But fortunately, it was a very timely, sort of happening where one of the large banking institutions, ICICI, decided to set up a venture arm. And the then chairman of ICICI, who was such a visionary man, and I still consider him my mentor, Mr. Vagul, said to me, he said, you're having so much problems trying to attract financing for this new technology of yours. Let me help you. I've just set up a venture fund company, and this is exactly the kind of thing we need to do. So he's the one who came to my rescue and gave me my first venture fund, venture financing. And I was so delighted that I didn't, in my mind, oh, I don't have to pay it back. This money is going into my company as equity. Oh, wow, that's cool. That's how I felt at that time. Um, and of course, ICICI did very well out of that investment because 1 year down the line, Unilever came, if you remember, and took over my Irish partners, and they realized that this was such an important technology that they wanted to own that part of it. So they bought out ICICI within a year and gave them 4 times what they had invested. So I think that way I started my track record of impressing investors that they could get a good return on such investments. So I think today when I look at what's happening, I think we are seeing a different India. We are seeing an India where we are where there are a number of young entrepreneurs willing to take that bet of taking an idea to the market. In life sciences, in the tech space, we are seeing 12,500 startups in the country, of which now 39 are unicorns. And and we're on our way to basically creating 50 unicorns. But when I look at life sciences, it's not the same. In the life sciences space, we've got about 3,500 startups across the country, which itself is a very good number. And what is also very exciting is that, a third of them have women as founders or co-founders, which is also very, very exciting. In terms of investment, I think this sector is going to see a lot more investment. Right now, it's a little under $2 billion of investment, but I think going ahead, we're going to see a lot more investment in biotech. When I look at some of the metrics, I think India today is amongst the top 12 destinations for biotechnology, and I really think we can be amongst the top 5 very, very soon. As I mentioned to you, unfortunately, our share of the biotech market is very small. It's only about 3%. In terms of our contribution to global healthcare and other technologies that come out of biotech, for instance, India is the largest producer of BT cotton. Okay, India, as you know, is supplying 60% of the world's vaccines, and 70% of WHO's procurement of vaccines is from India. If you think about our aspiration that we want 1 in 5 patients who need any insulin product, we want to cater to that need. That's where we are heading. If you look at other aspects of biotechnology, I think we are doing pretty well. Even in terms of enzyme technologies, biofuels, I think India is really doing very well. And I don't, for at all doubt the fact that in the next 5 years we will be very rapidly climbing up those ranks, uh, from 12 to probably 5. And that's what we are aspiring for, because we are also aspiring to create a bioeconomy, as we call it, of $150 billion by 2025. That's the target. And I think it can be done because we do have a huge amount of potential. And I also believe that, COVID has actually brought in a wonderful inflection point for the life sciences sector, for the pharma biotech sector, because what we've seen in COVID is something which would have taken years to happen. Today, what we've seen in India is we've done a lot of things at warp speed with resilience. So, whether it is developing diagnostic tests, okay, let me tell you that at the start of the pandemic in March, we had a handful of, we just had about 14 government laboratories catering to the testing needs of the nation. And we could hardly do 10,000 tests a day for the whole country. Okay. Today, we have almost 1,500 labs across the country, which are actually, doling out more than 1 million tests a day. So that's the way we've got private sector to partner the government and quickly ramp up scale. So, we were also very, very dependent on a few imported test kits from Thermo Fisher and a few other companies. And within 6 weeks, we were able to indigenize our own kits very, very rapidly. And we now don't depend so much on Thermo Fisher at all. I mean, today most of the test kits are developed indigenously. And I remember I was tasked with by the government to see whether we could actually, at the first instance, it was a component play of just putting all the components together and making a kit. But later on, what we did was we indigenized every single component, of whether it was um, the peptide, the sequences, whether it was various parts of the whole kit, we actually put it together. And I think that is what actually helped us to quickly ramp up kit production in India. And um, today, of course, as I said, we are pretty confident that we are self-reliant in terms of testing and kits. Then came, of course, a lot of other deficits that we saw, such as the PPEs and masks and ventilators, and I think all that was also quickly kind of indigenized by either the garment industry or some the engineering industry, even the auto industry tried to sort of pivot and make some of these things. So I think it was a very exciting time. But for me, the most important thing that happened was clinical research. I suddenly found that there was a huge interest in, at warp speed, we had to develop vaccines. And, even that also became an opportunity for Indian vaccine makers. It was not just about technology transfer, but also taking a vaccine right from the very start of a sequenced virus to a full blown vaccine, which is what Bharat Biotech has developed. And as you must have seen in the Lancet article, that the data thus far is very impressive. And I think they are actually on their way to now sharing all their data. And hopefully, the 81% efficacy that they've seen will hopefully corroborate as they get more data. But I think overall, India has suddenly realized that it does have large capabilities, it has talent. It may not have the deep pockets, but it certainly has the potential to innovate, and to innovate at scale, and to innovate in an affordable manner. That was the exciting thing. And then the entire medical ecosystem has come together, because clinical trials now are becoming a very, very interesting part of our innovation ecosystem. That to me is really music to my ears, because without clinical research you cannot innovate the way we need to. And so we've suddenly found that companies are beginning to invest in novel programs. Clinicians are willing to spare time for very high-end clinical research. I'm already involved with another small startup, which Siddharth Mukherjee, who, as you know, is a very famous oncologist, and I put together, and we are trying to see if we can afford can we provide affordable CAR T therapies in India. So that's something which we're doing in Bangalore. It's already, we are hoping to infuse our first patient by July this year. So, COVID, of course, set us back because we ought to have done it by now. But despite that, I think we've done very well to, set up this very world-class facility in a hospital, and we hope to basically get into that space as well. So if you think about what we need to do as a tech destination, we certainly want to focus on some of these very important areas for India to not just innovate but seek excellence. So for instance, we want to be very good at cell line development. We want to be very good at mRNA templates, genomics for sure. Synthetic biology is another big area for India, and we are beginning to really invest in that area. I've already seen two or three very interesting startups in synthetic biology which need to scale up. Cell and gene therapy, as I mentioned, is going to be very important for India. Virology, of course, is going to be important for the whole world. And I think India has a head start because if you think about it, the number of institutes we have which are looking at various viruses gives us a very good edge to basically build on that. Immuno-oncology, of course, continues to be a very important area, and India must focus on that area as well. Then comes this whole area of medtech. I think, India has very strong IT and software skills. As you know, India actually is one of the largest providers of software services. We have almost 2.8 million software engineers in the country and another million hardware engineers in the country. And that makes us one of the largest in the world. If you look at Silicon Valley is 2.2 million software engineers. And okay, they have about 3 million hardware engineers in the US, but India is not doing too badly either. And you can see that, our space programs, our satellite programs, they're all so strong because of the space scientists and the software engineers that we have that can support them. And I believe that this whole area is a very, very exciting area. We're seeing a large number of medtech startups in India, and I think bio IT becomes a formidable combination when it comes to India because of the very large talent pool we have in life sciences and in computer science. So I think this combination of life science and computer science is something that India must focus on, leverage and scale up and become, world beating. So I think that's the excitement I see in biotech. And of course, we do have challenges because everything is about money, and India is very under resourced when it comes to investments. What we need to look at is how do we think smart. So I've been working with the government saying let's pick a few moonshots and invest in those moonshot programs in a very concentrated way. Let's focus on institutions that are really, really good and build them up a little more rather than spreading ourselves too thin. I think Indian policy makers in the past have been too pulled by political forces all over, and they've sort of diluted their efforts because everyone wants an IIT in some area and an IIM somewhere else or an IISc globally somewhere else. I think we need to build on what we already have because that's the way you can build scale and dominance. And then, of course, I believe that regulations must also become much easier. If we can use this time in COVID to reimagine, rethink, and reinvent the way we regulate these ideas to the market journey and make them warp speed, give companies the opportunity to get emergency use authorizations and then give them a full blown authorization after they get you enough real world evidence. Those are some of the ideas we're coming out with, and the government is very amenable. Otherwise, Indian regulators used to take 3 times what US FDA takes to even allow us to get to the next step. And we are saying this has to stop. You guys just have to, first and foremost, not only catch up with other regulators, but even leapfrog and do things in a much smarter way. Today, we have a lot of technologies, we have a lot of data science that can give us the kind of answers we want to safety, efficacy, and other aspects, evaluating any new drug or device or whatever you want to call it. So that's the way I'm looking at it. Better, easier regulations, smarter investments, and better policies, because I think we need to make sure that R&D is incentivized in a very big way. Unfortunately, government has not really focused on R&D in a very strong way. They focus on production, but they don't focus on R&D. So whilst we've got a productivity linked incentive scheme, I'm actually encouraging the government to say, why not a research linked incentive scheme? And let's also get the academia industry interlink really strengthened, because that's not happening. So there's lots to do. But I think it's very exciting to build this world class, world beating biotech sector based on all the potential that India has to innovate. One of the things is, as you all know, these times of adversity actually bring out the best in us. And in India, I can tell you, we've done very well because we've actually, unlike other parts of the world, been very ready to, to experiment with new therapies, new interventions. I can tell you, why is US and Europe fared so badly in terms of managing COVID patients, okay? I think our doctors in India did much better. They were willing to pivot. They were willing to experiment with new therapies and new combinations. The doctors in the West, because of whatever it is of liability or whatever, they were stuck to standard of care protocols, which simply didn't work in the case of COVID. So I think you lost a lot of very interesting opportunities. I remember my own family members telling me, if we get COVID, we want to be in India. Because in India, you seem to have so many new drugs and so many new treatments, and everyone, whom we've heard about has come out of COVID very well. But here, anybody who gets COVID, my God, it's like a Russian roulette. They are, most likely they die. And that's because you've been so rigid and not willing to experiment. And this constant thing of, no, remdesivir is okay, remdesivir is not. Such and such a product is okay, such and such a product. You won't believe it, in Europe, they still don't allow remdesivir. At least in the US, you're allowing many of these products under emergency use. The only product that is allowed around the world is a steroid. For God's sake, Indian doctors started using steroids right in the beginning. So it's not like it was a eureka moment for us. That was the way we treated COVID patients right from the start. But we added so many more products. We've understood the disease so well. And I personally believe Indian doctors have done very well managing COVID, and much better than what doctors in other parts of the world have done. That is my personal belief and experience. And so, I'll end my chat here, because I think you want to now get on to questions and answer, a Q&A session. So I hope I've said what I've had to say and open it up to an interesting conversation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shaw. That was a great talk. And thank you so much for comprehensively covering the history, the current, and the future of the biotech ecosystem in India. And you made a few interesting points.
Shubham, मेरा लड़का है.
Can you read them? Yeah. Sorry. One was a very interesting point where you said that India has always focused on economies of scale, but now we should now focus on the value and not the volume gain, and move towards the IP-driven growth. Now we all know that Biocon is renowned for its emphasis on R&D in a country like India, where private entities and universities haven't heavily invested in R&D. Now, even in COVID-19 scenario, we saw Serum being a contract manufacturer and only Bharat Biotech being an indigenous vaccine manufacturer. So do you see any sign of changes towards R&D spending for the entire industry? And how can specifically education institutions play a role in this?
So let me say one thing, Shubham, that is that the government of India actually has supported a lot of innovation. So we have Biotech, which is a part of DBT, the Biotech Industry Research Advancement Council. And whilst you only hear of Bharat Biotech, and you must have also heard of Bharat Biotech developing an intranasal vaccine now, Genova, another company, is developing an mRNA vaccine. And there are many, many, many companies. Today, we are actually supporting something like 50 vaccine programs, which are all based on novel technologies, coming out of small biotech startups and larger companies. And as you know, even Serum Institute is also developing a novel, vaccine in partnership with US universities. Biological E is developing a receptor domain binding vaccine uh, with Baylor Institute. And, there's a lot of that happening. So there is a lot of innovation happening. I think you're going to see now a lot of universities in India beginning to start developing a lot of novel ideas. I think we are seeing a plethora of innovation coming out of the labs of IISC and IITs and ICERs and CCMBs and many, many other universities. So I know that CSIR itself, their labs have actually come up with a lot of new ideas. So I think this has unleashed that kind of innovation and ideation that ought to have happened a long time ago. But I think at least it's happening with COVID.
I just have a small follow-up before Amrita asks a question. Uh, do you believe the Indian regulators move to authorize Bharat Biotech's vaccine before their phase 3 efficacy data was out was a valid move for skeptics for the
Look,
medical
Shubham,
industry?
I think that's a very unfair kind of allegation because if you must know, let's look at what happened to many vaccines around the world. Okay, this was warp speed time. We wanted vaccines. Shortcuts have been taken, but they've been taken with judicious judgment saying, is it safe? Is it immunogenic? Those were the questions people are asking. Now you ask me one question, and that is, look, AstraZeneca's vaccine trial was botched up. Okay.
Hmm.
Under normal circumstances, it would have never been approved. Okay.
Yeah.
But UK, because of the urgency and emergency, they were willing to do a post hoc analysis and approve it. So isn't that wrong as well?
Yeah.
But at times such as this, you have to, bet on things which have promise. And I just
Right.
felt that, Bharat Biotech got into a huge controversy. And yes, strictly speaking, if you go by the tenets of what a normal world looks like, then you might have a problem with those kind of approvals. But here they were very cautious. They said, look, the data looks so good that we will allow you to kind of start vaccinating people, but we will only allow you to do that with very strict pharmacovigilance. That's what they wanted. So they said, look, we want every patient who is to be followed up. Now I think that was quite a fair approval process that they went in for, but they got slammed by everybody who was very critical of India because they felt, oh, this is not acceptable. But nothing is acceptable in this world from a normal world point of view. So why can't you be bold, experimental, and address the needs of the day?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Amrita?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think one of the things that like definitely stood out like from the talks was that you mentioned one of your concerns is that you couldn't attract enough women to the R&D departments at your firm, or like other
No,
like
R&D I can, but not other departments.
okay, yeah. So like just I guess like just focusing on like women's employment. Like 2 weeks ago, The Economist came out with an article that said only about like 7% of urban Indian women are in the workforce. And in fact, the Indian women in the workforce has reduced from about 32% in 2005 to 20% in 2020. Seeing these numbers, like contrary to popular assumptions about increasing the number of women in the workforce because of economic and society modernization, how do you think we have reached here, and like what is the step forward according to you?
So, as you know, around the world, I think COVID has been very unfair to women. So when layoffs have happened, the first people to be affected have been women employees. Okay. I also feel it's been very unfair. In fact, I was at one of these Women's Day panel discussions, and one of the discussions was that this work from home model, you would have thought that it would help women, but actually it hasn't, because women have to actually then really take on the two chores of looking after the home and work from home. Men, on the other hand, have basically made a one room dedicated as an office for them, and they expect to be served in that office, saying, "Look, this is my job now. The whole day I'm going to be here, and you people have to serve me." And I guess the wife who's also working has been told that, "Look, it's your job to also serve me because my job is more important than yours." This has to change. This is a societal problem where a man feels that a man's job is more important than his wife's job or the woman's job. And until that happens, Anvita, I don't think it's going to really make a difference. In India, for instance, we know that there is such a bias towards the male child. Okay. Today, of course, you have enough role models to show you that women are doing just as well as men. Look at our space programs. I mean, look at even in NASA, it was that Indian woman, Swati Mohan, who was celebrated. So, Indians should understand that women are capable of doing anything and everything. And people like us have shown it, and people respect people like us. Society respects women like us who have shown that we are strong and we can run businesses. And there are so many examples. I'm not alone in this. I mean, I have a huge tribe of business leaders who are women. So there are no dearth of examples or role models. It is still a societal mindset, which is really that it's the man that continues the family legacy. It is the man who has a better right to inheritance, and so on and so forth. For some reason, women don't enjoy that same status in society, and we have to work very hard at it. I mean, the government has come up with wonderful schemes of educating the girl child. A lot of the banks give privileged sort of financial status to women. But again, I blame VCs, because VCs would rather finance a male entrepreneur than a woman. And that has to change, because I feel women somehow are perceived. And I know in my own case, I was perceived as someone who is not a risk taker, who is not ambitious, who cannot possibly be as strong as her male competitor. I mean, I've proved all of that wrong, right? And I had to do it with a lot of demonstrated effort. But I did it because I knew what I was doing, and I wasn't bothered about what people were saying. I think women just need to prove themselves and prove to the world that it is a much better place. I mean, I'm saying for India, uh, including women will always, in the workplace or in the mainstream economy, will double per capita family income. And that's only good for society and good for the people.
Yeah, I definitely agree to that. Just like shifting the gears a bit, you mentioned that today Biocon delivers world-class therapeutics to patients around the globe and is India's largest producer of insulin and has pioneered the world's only Pitria-based recombinant human insulin, which is now available in over 40 countries. What made you decide to focus on recombinant human insulin as opposed to like other biosimilar products? And what are some of the challenges associated? This is a two-part question, but what are some of the challenges associated with the novel oral insulin that you vision to produce and sell in India?
So obviously, the first part of the question is easy. As I mentioned earlier on, India is at the epicenter of diabetes, and insulin is a very important therapy. And if people who need insulin can't access recombinant human insulin because of its cost, there's something wrong. And so that was my sort of raison d'etre, if you were to call it that, to develop a low cost insulin, a recombinant human insulin. And of course, I had an existing proprietary PICIA technology that I was using to make enzymes. I said, let me pivot it to make insulin, and it worked. So that's how I started with this technology, and it's a very proprietary technology. As far as and of course, it's not just that I only make insulins. I also make antibodies. So it's not that I don't make antibodies. I make both, and at scale. And so that's the first part of the question. And what was your second part?
The second part was about the oral insulin.
Oh, the oral
And
insulin. So the oral
yeah,
insulin, obviously, as you know, it's a challenge because oral delivery of insulin is possible. I mean, we've shown that you can orally deliver insulin. It's really the cost factor because it's all about how much insulin is absorbed, and then it becomes about other things like when you want to compare it to injectable insulin, it will never make sense because then the cost and everything. So you have to find I mean, it works. So we have an oral insulin that works, and we know it works very well. I think what we are trying to see is what is that niche where it really can make a difference and where you can afford to price it at a certain level, which where you don't keep comparing it to insulin. Because if you keep comparing it to insulin, you will never be able to justify it. But if you can show that this insulin is doing something more than injected insulin, I think that's the way to basically make a case, a strong case for it.
Since you just mentioned about affordable pricing, I want to bring light to a recent situation. And being an ardent Twitter user myself, I've seen you tweeting about it. Where recently, when the government permitted private hospitals and to do COVID vaccination, they capped the pricing at around 200 rupees, 50 rupees per dose, which broke down to 150 for the manufacturer, 100 rupees to the hospital for the service provider. And I think you were tweeting frustration that this won't be feasible for vaccine manufacturers to supply to private hospitals. So, why do you think the government went ahead with this decision, and what is their hesitation on their end to open vaccination by private entities? And what do you think is the best way forward? Have a more realistic price cap like rupees 400, or the price cap should be done with entirely for the private sector?
So first and foremost, I believe that when you look at ramping up vaccination, I mean, today there was a very interesting map that came out in the world saying what is the rate of vaccination in different parts of the world. And for a population the size of India, we are very low, even though we are doing millions of doses. We need to be at least 5 million doses per day. 5 million doses per day can never be delivered by keeping it within the government system. You will need to have private sector coming into play, just like we did with those RT-PCR tests. I think today we need private hospitals because we just have so many more private hospitals of scale in the country. And I think each one of them, if you combine it all, they can very easily do 5 million doses a day. So without the private sector, we will never be able to ramp up vaccination. That's for sure. Secondly, I think it is the government's job to basically procure vaccines and offer it free of cost in the government hospitals. But when you come to the private sector, I think the private sector ought to be allowed to charge without a cap for the simple reason that market forces will drive down the prices. And anyway, I think having two, three, four vaccines now coming into the market will automatically put pressure on pricing. And I'm already seeing that even though they've capped this price at 250, which I think is absurd, it's not sustainable. India is likely to get at least three more vaccines approved in the next 1 month. One is the Novavax, one is the Sputnik vaccine from Russia, and of course, other vaccines that are also being developed in India, and hopefully J&J at a later stage. So all these vaccines are going to come into play. And of course, when all these vaccine makers are making vaccines at scale, there is going to be competition. So I, for one, believe that, and most of them have indicated that they would like to charge between 500 to 1,000 rupees for their vaccines, which is nothing, if you ask me. I mean, as someone said to me the other day, We are busy cribbing and trying to cap a price on vaccines, and yet the same patients don't blink an eyelid going and getting an antibody test for 1,000 rupees or an RT-PCR test for 1,000 rupees. So what is this absurd logic of capping a life-saving, vaccine at 150, which is like $2, which is crazy, and you don't mind spending 10 or $15 for a diagnostic test that tells you what the response to that vaccine is. So I think we need to be a little more rational, and I think government also should not be hammering the private sector vaccine makers when actually they're the saviors of our country. And I think vaccine makers ought to be allowed to make money because they've made huge capital investments, and they need to recoup those investments. So let the government procure its bit at $2 or $3 or whatever they can negotiate with the vaccine makers, and give it free of cost to people who want to go and get vaccinated at government centers. But those who opt for the private sector ought to be willing to pay.
Okay. Thank you for the answer. And I know we're going off time, but if you don't mind, can I just ask two audience questions? We
Yeah,
received a lot of.
but I have a hard stop now,
Yes.
so I'll have to, yeah.
Sure. So I think just two short questions. One is from an Alan Davis, who asked, how is the exclusivity of pharma patents changing in India? What is the current standard, and will it change soon to make it more exclusive like the US and Europe? And Kaushal Gandhi asked, India is being called the pharmacy of the world and yet depends heavily on China for inputs, which has been a recent conversation. Can we become end-to-end integrated manufacturers? And if yes, what will be the roadmap?
So the second question, I would say yes, we can be a vertically integrated country. Whether it's required or necessary is another question, because I think we need to have global supply chains which cannot be built on paranoia. I think global supply chains must be built on what makes sense. And I think the world is becoming too paranoid about this whole thing of wanting to be localized and nationalistic. And even in the vaccine manufacturing, every country wants everything to happen. But remember, economies of scale are also very important. So the China has economies of scale in, say, key starting materials, and if India can also create economies of scale, but I think there needs to be a little bit of interdependence for it to be efficient. Okay. As far as the first question was about IP, and there I would say that IP is really India wants to be a very IP-led country, because I think it is very important for India to move from volume to value, and I think India is very committed to IP creation. I think the big question mark we have is that what is this compulsory licensing all about? I, for one, don't believe much in compulsory licensing, but I do believe in voluntary licensing. For instance, I do believe that today all the big pharma ought to do some introspection. Okay. They have received huge amounts of public funding, whether it's BARDA, EU, COVAX. You think about it, they've received a lot of public funding. They've also received a huge amount of support from the regulatory agencies to develop their products at warp speed and take it to the market in the shortest possible time. Is it fair to just keep all that to themselves and price it in whatever way they want to and profiteer out of that, and not be willing to license those technologies to other companies in other parts of the world so that they can actually give it to their people on the grounds of IP? I don't think so, because let's face it, IP is yours only if you've made all those required investments to develop and create value from that IP. But if public funding has helped you to do all of that, then what is the return on investment you're seeking? Is it equitable? That's the question I ask.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shaw, for these answers. And we respect that you have a time cap. So I will
Yeah.
not stick to my written conclusion, but keep it short. Thank you so much for this informed presentation. And hopefully everyone who here can have significant takeaways on how we can build a better India. And we can all look forward to taking inspiration from you on how to navigate challenges and still end up being triumphant. With that
Thank
being
you. Thank you so much.
thank you so much and have a good day.
Thank you so much for joining us today.